The emergency call came through to Cancun's municipal police at 4:47 a.m. on November 4th. A security guard at Plaza Las Americas shopping center had spotted something unusual. A small child, barefoot and alone, wandering through the parking lot in the pre-dawn darkness. When Officer Miguel Herrera arrived at the scene, he found a 7-year-old boy sitting on the curb, rocking back and forth, unable to speak. The child wore only shorts and a stained t-shirt. No shoes, no identification, no way to tell anyone who he was or where he came from. Herrera had been with the Cancun police for 12 years, but this situation struck him differently. The boy wouldn't make eye contact. He didn't respond to questions in Spanish or English. When Herrera tried to comfort him, the child flinched. Something terrible had happened to this kid, that much was clear. But what? And where were his parents? The officer called for backup and child services. Within an hour, photographs of the unidentified boy were circulating through police networks and social media. Someone, somewhere, had to be missing this child. Yet as the sun rose over the Caribbean coast that morning, bringing tourists to Cancun's pristine beaches and luxury resorts, nobody came forward. Nobody claimed him. And the boy himself remained locked in silence, unable or unwilling to reveal what horrors had brought him to that parking lot alone. What police didn't know yet was that this child had witnessed something no 7-year-old should ever see. He had watched 2 people die. He had seen his mother murdered right in front of him, and the man responsible had looked him in the eye, told him to wait for his mama, and driven away knowing she would never come. 300 miles south in Mexico City, Elena Ruiz was trying desperately to reach her daughter. Elena had raised Mariana as a single mother after Mariana's father walked out when she was just 2 years old. They'd always been close, talking almost daily despite the distance. But for the past 18 hours, Mariana hadn't answered her phone. The calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages sat unread. And now Elena had received a call from a friend in Cancun who had seen the police photos circulating online. "Elena, I think that's your grandson," the friend had said, her voice shaking. "The boy they found. I'm almost certain it's him." Elena's hands trembled as she pulled up the images on her phone. The moment she saw the child's face, her heart stopped. It was him. Her grandson, her Mariana's boy. The autistic child who couldn't speak, but who had the sweetest smile she had ever known. But if he was alone in Cancun at 5 in the morning, where was Mariana? She called the Cancun police immediately, confirming the child's identity. Yes, that was her grandson. His name was Daniel. He was 7 years old, nonverbal, autistic. He lived with his mother, Mariana Ruiz, age 31. And Mariana would never ever leave her son alone like that. Something was catastrophically wrong. "Where is my daughter?" Elena demanded. "If you found Daniel alone, where is Mariana?" The officer on the phone couldn't answer that question. But he promised they would investigate. They would find out what happened. Elena should come to Cancun as soon as possible. And then he asked her a question that made her blood run cold. "Does your daughter know anyone in Cancun? Does she have friends here? Business contacts?" Elena thought carefully. She was working on a cruise ship, she said. The Caribbean dream. She was a hospitality coordinator. She mentioned some co-workers, but I don't remember names. "Why? What's happening?" The officer hesitated. "We're trying to establish her last known whereabouts. Can you give us the name of the cruise line?" "Coastal Luxury Lines," Elena replied. "But that ship should be at sea right now. It does week-long trips from Miami to Cozumel and back. Mariana was scheduled to work this week's voyage." What Elena didn't know was that the Caribbean Dream had docked in Cozumel the previous evening, just 45 miles south of Cancun. And while the ship was scheduled to depart again that morning, one of its crew members had never returned from shore leave. That crew member was Mariana Ruiz. Back in Cancun, Detective Laura Mendoza was assigned to the case. A 15-year veteran of the investigative division, Mendoza had handled everything from drug trafficking to organized crime. But cases involving children always affected her differently. She had 2 kids of her own, and the thought of them wandering alone and terrified made her physically ill. She sat down with Daniel in a quiet room at the station, a child psychologist present. The boy still wouldn't speak, but he could communicate in other ways. Using pictures and gestures, they established some basic facts. His name was Daniel. He was 7. He lived with his mama. And when shown photographs of different locations around Cancun, his hand stopped at one image: a residential area in Region Xochitl, a working-class neighborhood far from the tourist zone. Does someone you know live there? Mendoza asked gently. Daniel nodded. Your mama? He hesitated, then shook his head. Someone else. Another nod. Mendoza's instincts were screaming now. This child had been found miles away from the tourist areas, in a shopping center parking lot. His mother was missing. And he knew someone in Region Xochitl, one of Cancun's less affluent neighborhoods where many cruise ship and hotel workers lived when they weren't at sea. She made a decision. Let's go look at that neighborhood, she told her partner, Officer Herrera. Something tells me we'll find answers there. What they would find, 8 days later, would turn this missing person case into a double homicide investigation that would shock even seasoned detectives. Because Daniel hadn't just witnessed violence, he had watched the man he trusted, the man who had promised to take care of his mother, commit murder twice in one night. And then that same man had driven him to a parking lot, looked into his innocent eyes, and told him the cruelest lie imaginable. Wait here, your mama will come get you soon. But Mariana would never come. She was already dead, her body hidden in a place where it would take police more than a week to find her. And the man responsible was going about his business as if nothing had happened, as if 2 lives hadn't been brutally ended, as if a child's entire world hadn't been destroyed in a single night of rage and violence. The Caribbean sun continued to shine over Cancun's turquoise waters. Tourists sipped margaritas and lounged on white sand beaches. Cruise ships came and went from the port at Cozumel. And somewhere in the city, a killer was free, believing he had gotten away with murder. He was wrong. Mariana Ruiz had never planned to work on cruise ships. She had studied hospitality management at University in Mexico City, dreaming of managing a boutique hotel or opening her own bed and breakfast someday. But life had other plans. When Daniel was diagnosed with autism at age 3, everything changed. The therapy costs, the specialized care, the constant medical appointment, all required money that her hotel salary couldn't provide. So when Coastal Luxury Lines offered her a position as hospitality coordinator on the Caribbean Dream, promising better pay and benefits, she took it. The job meant being away from Daniel for weeks at a time, leaving him with her mother in Mexico City. It broke her heart every single departure, but Mariana told herself it was temporary. Just a few years to save money, to get Daniel into the best programs, to build a future for them. She was a good mother, doing what she had to do. Everyone who knew her said so. But what nobody knew was that Mariana had recently made a decision that would cost her everything. She had started a relationship with someone she shouldn't have, someone dangerous, someone who presented himself as successful and charming, but who carried violence just beneath the surface. His name was Roberto Salazar, and he owned a small tourism company in Cancun that specialized in private yacht charters and luxury excursions. At 52 years old, Roberto was 21 years older than Mariana, but he knew how to make a woman feel special. Expensive dinners when her ship docked in Cozumel, gifts for Daniel, promises of a better life. Mariana had been lonely for so long, raising her son alone, working exhausting shifts on the cruise ship. Roberto's attention felt like salvation. What she didn't realize was that Roberto Salazar had a history of controlling behavior, explosive anger, and legal troubles. 3 years earlier, he had been arrested for assault after beating a former employee who had reported safety violations in his yacht business to local authorities. The charges were eventually dropped after the victim accepted a cash settlement and left Cancun. But the incident revealed Roberto's true nature, a man who saw any challenge to his authority as a personal attack worthy of violent retribution. When Detective Mendoza and Officer Herrera arrived in Region Xochitl that first day, following the lead from Daniel's recognition of the neighborhood, they began canvassing door to door. The area was typical of working-class Cancun, modest concrete homes with tin roofs. Children playing in dusty streets, the sound of reggaeton mixing with the call of street vendors. This was where the people who made the tourist industry run actually lived, far from the glossy resort zone. At the 5th house they visited, an elderly woman named Senora Beatriz opened the door. When Mendoza showed her a photo of Mariana, the woman's face went pale. "That's Roberto's girlfriend," she said immediately. "I've seen her coming and going from his place next door. Is she in trouble?" Mendoza's pulse quickened. "Roberto who?" "Roberto Salazar. He owns the house next to mine. Rents out the upstairs to make extra money. I've seen that woman there several times in the past few months, usually when the cruise ships are in port. And do you know if she's there now? Senora Beatriz shook her head. I haven't seen her in over a week, but I heard shouting from Roberto's place a few nights ago. November 4th, I think. Very loud. A man yelling, a woman screaming. Then it went quiet. November 4th. The same night Daniel was found wandering alone. Mendoza felt ice in her veins. Did you call the police? The elderly woman looked down. In this neighborhood, detective, you learn not to get involved in other people's business. Especially not Roberto's. He has a temper. Everyone knows it. What else can you tell me about him? He runs a boat charter business. Caribbean Dream Excursions, I think it's called. Takes tourists out on private yachts, fishing trips, snorkeling. He's done well for himself, or so he likes to tell everyone. Drives a nice Mercedes, always wearing expensive clothes. But he's not a good man, detective. I've heard him yelling at people before. I've seen him grab a worker by the throat right out in the street. Nobody says anything because people need their jobs. Mendoza thanked her and immediately radioed for backup. If Mariana had last been seen at Roberto Salazar's property, and if there had been screaming on November 4th, they needed to search that house immediately. She also ran Roberto's name through the police database. What came back confirmed Senora Beatriz's warning, assault charges from 3 years ago, multiple complaints about his business practices, and a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend who claimed he had threatened to kill her. While they waited for the warrant to search Roberto's property, Mendoza called Coastal Luxury Lines. The human resources manager confirmed that Mariana Ruiz was indeed employed as a hospitality coordinator on the Caribbean Dream. The ship had docked in Cozumel on the evening of November 3rd. Mariana had requested shore leave, which was granted. She was expected back by midnight on November 4th for the ship's departure. She never returned. Did she mention where she was going during shore leave? Mendoza asked. Her request form said she was visiting a friend in Cancún, the HR manager replied. We didn't require more details than that. It's not unusual for crew members to visit the mainland when we dock in Cozumel. Is something wrong? We're investigating her disappearance, Mendoza said carefully. Can you tell me if anyone else from the ship knew about her plans? I can check with her department head, but I don't have that information immediately available. After hanging up, Mendoza turned to Herrera. Mariana took shore leave to visit someone in Cancún on November 3rd. We know she had a relationship with Roberto Salazar. We know they were screaming at his house on November 4th. And we know her son was found alone in the early morning hours of November 4th. Herrera's expression was grim. You think Salazar killed her? I think we need to find Mariana fast, and I think Roberto Salazar is our best lead. She paused. But there's something that doesn't add up. If Mariana was at Salazar's house and something happened to her, why would Daniel be found all the way across town at Plaza Las Americas? That's miles away. Maybe Salazar drove him there to get rid of him. But why leave him alive? If he killed Mariana, wouldn't Daniel be a witness? Herrera considered this, maybe because Daniel can't talk. An autistic, nonverbal 7-year-old can't testify against anyone. Maybe Salazar figured the kid wouldn't be a threat. It was a chilling thought, but it made sense, and it made Mendoza even more determined to find Mariana and bring Roberto Salazar in for questioning. The warrant came through within hours. As Mendoza and a team of officers approached Roberto's property in Regions Yoshilo, she noticed the house matched Senora Beatriz's description, a 2-story concrete structure, painted pale yellow with a separate entrance to the upstairs unit. A black Mercedes was parked in the driveway. The downstairs windows had bars on them, common in the neighborhood, but somehow more sinister given what they suspected. Mendoza knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Cancún police. We have a warrant to search these premises. After 30 seconds of silence, she nodded to Herrera. He forced the door open. The smell hit them immediately. Detective Mendoza had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the odor of decomposition, even faint as it was. She exchanged a glance with Herrera, both of them pulling out their weapons as they entered Roberto Salazar's house. The downstairs appeared normal at first. A modest living room with worn furniture, a small kitchen with dishes in the sink, a bathroom that needed cleaning. But the smell was stronger near the staircase leading to the second floor. Mendoza's stomach tightened as she climbed the steps, each creak of the old wood floor amplifying the tension. The upstairs unit consisted of 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a small sitting area. The door to the main bedroom stood partially open. Mendoza pushed it wider with her foot, keeping her weapon raised. On the bed, covered with a thin blanket, lay the body of a man. "Get forensics here now," Mendoza said quietly to Herrera. She approached carefully, noting the single bullet wound to the head, the blood that had soaked into the pillow and mattress. The victim appeared to be in his late 30s, Hispanic, wearing jeans and a white tank top. He'd been dead for several days. While they waited for the crime scene team, Mendoza searched the rest of the apartment. In the bathroom, she found a woman's toiletry bag. Inside, makeup, a toothbrush, and a prescription bottle with Mariana Ruiz's name on it. In the bedroom closet, women's clothing hung beside men's clothes. Mariana had been staying here. That much was clear. But who was the dead man in the bed? And where was Mariana? On the nightstand, Mendoza found a wallet. The ID inside belonged to Carlos Mendez, age 38, listing an address in Playa del Carmen. She photographed everything, careful not to contaminate the scene further. Herrera appeared in the doorway. "Forensics is 10 minutes out. I found something downstairs you need to see." In the kitchen, Herrera pointed to a bulletin board on the wall. Pinned to it were various papers, bills, receipts, and a handwritten note that made Mendoza's blood run cold. "Carlos, you need to move out by the end of the month. I'm tired of your complaints. The AC works fine. You're not getting a rent reduction." Roberto Carlos Mendez was Roberto's tenant, Herrera said, and it looks like they weren't getting along. Mendoza took photos of the note and began searching through the other papers. She found city inspection reports, dated 3 weeks earlier, documenting problems with the upstairs unit, air conditioning that hadn't worked for over a month, a leaking roof, electrical issues. The reports ordered Roberto to make repairs within 30 days or face fines. She also found an eviction notice dated November 1st, giving Carlos Mendez 30 days to vacate. The reasons cited: unauthorized occupants residing in unit without landlord approval. Roberto was evicting him, Mendoza said. And Carlos had filed complaints with the city about the living conditions, just like that assault case from 3 years ago, Herrera added. Someone reported him to authorities, and he responded with violence. The forensics team arrived, led by Dr. Patricia Gomez, the medical examiner. She examined the body carefully, taking photographs and notes. "Based on decomposition and ambient temperature, I'd estimate death occurred between 5 and 7 days ago," she said. "Single gunshot wound to the head, close range. The victim was likely lying down when shot, possibly asleep. I'll know more after the autopsy. Can you determine approximate time of death more specifically?" Mendoza asked. "Given the conditions, I'd say late evening of November 3rd or early morning November 4th. The body temperature and decomposition patterns are consistent with that timeline. November 4th. The same night Daniel was found. The same night Senora Beatriz heard screaming. Mendoza's phone rang. It was the station. Elena Ruiz had arrived from Mexico City and was demanding to see her daughter immediately. "Tell her we're working on locating Mariana," Mendoza said. "Don't mention the body we found. Not until we know more." She hung up and turned to Dr. Gomez. "We need to find another victim. Mariana Ruiz, 31 years old, she was staying in this apartment. Her son was found wandering alone on the morning of November 4th, and she hasn't been seen since. You think she's dead too? I think Carlos Mendez was killed in this apartment on November 4th. I think Mariana witnessed it. And I think whoever killed Carlos couldn't let her walk away." Dr. Gomez's expression darkened. "If she was killed the same night and her body was disposed of elsewhere, we're looking for a dump site. The question is where," Herrera said. "Cancún and the surrounding area is massive. Jungles, cenotes, beaches, construction sites. A body could be hidden anywhere." Mendoza thought about Daniel, sitting at the police station with a child psychologist, unable to tell them what he had seen. That little boy held the answers they needed, but his autism and trauma had locked those answers away. "We need to find Roberto Salazar," she said. "Right now. Issue a bolo. I want every officer in Quintana Roo looking for him in that black Mercedes." As the forensics team continued processing the scene, Mendoza walked back through the apartment, trying to reconstruct what had happened. Roberto and Carlos had been in conflict over the rental property. Roberto was facing city fines because of Carlos's complaints. He had started eviction proceedings, but apparently that wasn't enough. On November 3rd, Mariana had taken shore leave from her cruise ship to visit Roberto. She was staying in his house, probably in this very apartment with Carlos. And then something had gone catastrophically wrong. Had Roberto come upstairs on November 4th and shot Carlos? Had Mariana been there when it happened? If so, she became a witness to murder, which meant Roberto had to silence her too. But where was her body? And how did Daniel end up at Plaza Las Americas, miles away from this house? Mendoza's radio crackled. "Detective, we've got something." Traffic cameras picked up Salazar's Mercedes on the night of November 4th. Where? Heading south on Highway 307 toward Playa del Carmen around 2 a.m., then back north around 4 a.m., and then we have him again at 4:30 a.m. near Plaza Las Americas, Playa del Carmen, 20 minutes south of Cancún. What had Roberto been doing there in the middle of the night? "Pull all available footage," Mendoza ordered. "I want to know everywhere that car went." The traffic camera footage told a story that made Detective Mendoza sick to her stomach. At 2:17 a.m. on November 4th, Roberto Salazar's black Mercedes was captured heading south on Highway 307. The camera angle showed two figures in the front seats, but the image quality wasn't clear enough to identify them definitively. What was clear, however, was that the rear passenger window appeared darker than the others, suggesting someone or something was in the back seat. 43 minutes later, at 3:04 a.m., the same Mercedes passed a camera heading north, back toward Cancún. This time, only the driver was visible. The back seat appeared empty. At 4:28 a.m., another camera caught the Mercedes near Plaza Las Americas shopping center, where Daniel would be found wandering just 19 minutes later. "He drove south with Mariana and Daniel," Mendoza said, studying the footage on her laptop at the station. "Somewhere between Cancún and Playa del Carmen, he disposed of her body. Then he drove back north and abandoned Daniel at the plaza." Herrera leaned over her shoulder. "Why not kill the boy too? Why leave a witness?" "Because Daniel can't communicate what he saw. Roberto probably thought he was safe leaving an autistic, nonverbal child alive. Who would believe him, even if he could somehow tell what happened?" Elena Ruiz sat in an interview room down the hall, growing more frantic with each passing hour. Mendoza had managed to delay meeting with her while they processed the crime scene, but she couldn't put it off much longer. The problem was, they still hadn't found Mariana's body. And until they did, there was a sliver of hope that perhaps she was still alive somewhere. But Mendoza knew better. Carlos Mendez was dead. The timeline matched, and Roberto Salazar had fled. A bolo had been issued for Roberto, but so far there had been no sightings. His yacht charter business office was locked and dark. His phone went straight to voicemail. His business partner, a man named Javier Torres, claimed he hadn't seen Roberto in 3 days and had no idea where he might be. "We're searching the route between here and Playa del Carmen," Herrera said, "but it's mostly jungle and undeveloped land. If he pulled off the highway and went even 50 meters into the vegetation, we might never find her." Mendoza refused to accept that. "What's between Cancún and Playa del Carmen? Any landmarks, turnoffs, areas where someone might dump a body?" Herrera pulled up a map. "There's Puerto Morelos, about halfway between. Small fishing village, some resorts. There's also several cenotes in that area, construction sites for new hotels, and miles of mangrove swamps near the coast." Cenotes. The natural sinkholes that dotted the Yucatan Peninsula, some shallow and popular with tourists, others deep and unexplored. A body thrown into a cenote might never be recovered. "Start with the cenotes closest to Highway 307, Mendoza ordered, "and check any recent construction sites, somewhere he could access quickly from the road." While search teams mobilized, Mendoza finally went to speak with Elena Ruiz. The woman looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling as she clutched a photograph of Mariana and Daniel. "Please," Elena said before Mendoza could speak, "please tell me you found my daughter." Mendoza sat down across from her. "Mrs. Ruiz, I need to ask you some questions about Mariana's relationship with Roberto Salazar." Elena's face crumpled. "I told her that man was dangerous. I told her, but she said he was good to Daniel, that he helped with expenses, that he made her feel safe." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Safe? And now my grandson is traumatized, and my daughter is missing." "When did Mariana start seeing Roberto?" "About 6 months ago. She met him through her work. His company would book excursions for cruise ship passengers. They started talking, and he pursued her aggressively. Expensive gifts, romantic gestures. Mariana had been alone for so long, raising Daniel by herself. She wanted to believe someone could love them both. Did she ever mention problems in the relationship, arguments, violence? Alina hesitated. 3 weeks ago she called me upset. She said Roberto had gotten angry about something. She wouldn't tell me what. He had yelled at her, thrown things. She was scared. I begged her to leave him, to come home to Mexico City. But she said she couldn't, that her job was on the cruise ship and she needed the money for Daniel's therapy. Did she mention a man named Carlos Mendez? Carlos? Yes, he was Roberto's tenant. Mariana said he was a nice man, worked as a diving instructor in Playa del Carmen. She felt sorry for him because Roberto treated him terribly. The apartment had problems, and Roberto refused to fix anything. Mendoza took a breath. Mrs. Ruiz, we found Carlos Mendez. He's dead. Shot in his apartment on November 4th, the same night Daniel was found wandering alone. Elena's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God. And Mariana? We believe she witnessed Carlos's murder. We're doing everything we can to find her. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. After 5 days, the chances of finding Mariana alive were virtually zero. Elena began to sob. I knew something was wrong. The moment I heard Daniel was found alone, I knew. A mother knows, Detective. I felt it in my soul. I even told my sister I need to call the morgue, not the hospital. She thought I was being morbid, but I knew. Mendoza's phone buzzed. A text from the search coordinator found something at Cenote Azul. Need you here immediately. Cenote Azul was a small, relatively unknown sinkhole about 15 miles south of Cancún, just off Highway 307. Not a tourist destination, but locals knew about it. The perfect place to hide a body. Mendoza stood. Mrs. Ruiz, I have to go. But I promise you, we will find your daughter and we will bring Roberto Salazar to justice. As she rushed out of the station, Mendoza's mind raced. If they had found Mariana's body at Cenote Azul, it would confirm their timeline. It would prove Roberto had murdered both Carlos and Mariana. And it would mean a 7-year-old boy had watched his mother die and been abandoned to wait for her, knowing she would never come. Cenote Azul sat hidden behind a wall of thick jungle vegetation, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that branched off. Highway 307. Detective Mendoza arrived to find search teams already securing the area, their faces grim. Dr. Patricia Gomez stood at the edge of the cenote, looking down into the crystal-clear water that made the Yucatan's sinkholes so hauntingly beautiful and so deadly. We found her, Dr. Gomez said quietly as Mendoza approached. About 20 feet down, wedged between rocks. A local fisherman who knows this cenote spotted her this morning and called it in. Mendoza looked into the water. Even from the surface, she could see the pale shape of a body below, the woman's dark hair floating like seaweed in the current. Her stomach turned. Mariana Ruiz? We'll need to bring her up for positive identification, but based on the physical description you provided, yes. I'd estimate she's been in the water approximately 5 days, which matches your timeline for November 4th. The recovery took 3 hours. The dive teams worked carefully to bring Mariana's body to the surface without damaging potential evidence. When they finally laid her on the rocky shore, Mendoza had to look away for a moment. This was someone's daughter, Daniel's mother. A woman who had been trying to build a better life for her son. Dr. Gomez conducted a preliminary examination. Single gunshot wound to the chest. Based on the trajectory and powder residue, I'd say she was shot at close range while seated, possibly in a vehicle. There's also evidence of defensive wounds on her hands, cuts consistent with trying to grab a knife or sharp object. She fought back, Mendoza said. She fought hard. I'll know more after the full autopsy, but my preliminary assessment is that she was alive when she entered the water. The gunshot wound was fatal, but not immediately. She may have been conscious for several minutes. The thought of Mariana drowning in this cenote, shot and dying while her terrified son sat in Roberto's car somewhere above, made Mendoza's hands clench into fists. They had to find Salazar. Today. Back at the station, Mendoza laid out the complete timeline for her team. November 3rd, evening. Mariana arrives at Roberto's house on shore leave. Carlos Mendez is living upstairs. November 4th, approximately 1 a.m., Roberto gets into an argument with Carlos, possibly about the eviction, possibly about Mariana's presence. He shoots Carlos in his bed. Mariana witnesses the murder. Roberto then forces Mariana and Daniel into his Mercedes. At some point during the drive, Mariana attempts to defend herself, possibly with a knife she had in her purse. Roberto shoots her in the car with Daniel watching. He drives to Cenote Azul, disposes of her body, then continues back to Cancún, where he abandons Daniel at Plaza Las Americas around Chamois and Senchafin, telling the traumatized boy to wait for his mother. "We have physical evidence, we have timeline, we have motive," Mendoza said. "We just need Roberto Salazar." That afternoon they got their break. A gas station attendant in Chetumal near the Belize border recognized Roberto from the Bolo photos. He had filled up his Mercedes that morning and paid cash. Border Patrol was immediately notified. At 6:47 p.m. on November 11th, Mexican federal police stopped Roberto Salazar at the Belize border crossing. When officers approached his vehicle, he didn't resist. He simply sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, and said, "I know why you're here." They brought him back to Cancún in custody. Mendoza watched through the one-way glass as Roberto sat in the interrogation room. A 52-year-old man who looked older than his years, his expensive clothes rumpled, his hands shaking slightly. When she entered the room, Roberto looked up. "I want to confess," he said immediately. "I'll tell you everything. I just want it to be over." Mendoza sat down, turned on the recorder, and read him his rights. Roberto waived his right to an attorney. "Tell me what happened on November 4th, Mendoza said. Roberto's voice was flat, emotionless. "Carlos wouldn't leave. I told him to get out, that I was done with his complaints, his calls to the city. He cost me thousands in fines. But he refused to go. Said he had rights, that I couldn't force him out, so you shot him. I went upstairs to talk to him one more time. He was asleep. I had my gun. I don't know. I just lost control. I shot him, just once. He died right there." "And Mariana?" Roberto's mask cracked slightly. "She was in the bathroom. She heard the shot, came running out. She saw Carlos, saw me with the gun. She started screaming, saying she was calling the police. I couldn't let her do that. I grabbed her, put her and her kid in my car. Daniel. His name's Daniel. Right, Daniel. I drove around trying to think. Mariana was hysterical, crying, begging. Then she pulled out a knife, tried to stab me while I was driving. I shot her. I didn't mean to. It was self-defense. You shot her in front of her 7-year-old son." Roberto's face hardened. "The kid can't talk anyway. I figured he wouldn't be able to tell anyone what happened. So you dumped her body in a cenote and left her child in a parking lot. I told him his mother would come get him. I didn't know what else to say." The casual cruelty of it stunned Mendoza into silence for a moment. Roberto Salazar had murdered 2 people, traumatized a child, and his only concern was covering his own tracks. "You told a 7-year-old autistic boy to wait for the mother you had just killed. Do you understand what you did to that child?" Roberto looked away. "I panicked. I wasn't thinking straight." "No," Mendoza said coldly. "You were thinking very clearly. Clear enough to dispose of evidence. Clear enough to flee toward the border. You knew exactly what you were doing." The state of Quintana Roo charged Roberto Salazar with 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and illegal possession of a firearm. His confession, combined with the physical evidence from both crime scenes, the traffic camera footage, and the forensic timeline, built an insurmountable case against him. His attorney attempted to argue temporary insanity and self-defense for Mariana's shooting, but prosecutors demolished those claims with ease. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Elena Ruiz attended every single day, sitting in the front row of the courtroom, clutching the same photograph of Mariana and Daniel she had brought to the police station. She needed Roberto to see her, to be reminded that the people he murdered were not abstractions but human beings with families who loved them. Carlos Mendez's sister, Sofia, traveled from Playa del Carmen to testify about her brother. She described him as a gentle man who loved diving, who sent money home to their elderly parents every month, who had dreams of opening his own dive shop someday. She broke down on the stand when describing how Carlos had called her 2 weeks before his death, worried about his landlord's escalating anger. He said Roberto was getting more aggressive, Sofia testified through tears. He said maybe he should just move out, forget about the inspection reports and the deposit he'd lose. I told him to stand his ground, that he had rights. I told him Roberto couldn't do anything to him. Her voice cracked. I was wrong. The prosecution presented Daniel's testimony in the form of art therapy sessions. Working with specialists over several months, Daniel had gradually been able to communicate fragments of what he witnessed through drawings and gestures. The images were heartbreaking. Crude sketches of a man with a gun, a woman falling, a car, water. A child psychologist explained how severely traumatized Daniel remained, how he woke screaming from nightmares, how he had regressed in many of the developmental gains he had made before that terrible night. When Roberto took the stand in his own defense, he attempted to portray himself as a man pushed to his breaking point by an ungrateful tenant and an unstable woman. The jury saw through it immediately. His lack of genuine remorse, his attempts to justify murdering 2 people over a rental dispute and inspection reports, only reinforced their certainty of his guilt. On March 15th, after deliberating for less than 4 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Roberto Salazar to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years for kidnapping and weapons charges. He would die in prison. As bailiffs led Roberto away, he turned to look at Elena one final time. She met his eyes without flinching, her face set in stone. She had promised herself she would be there to see justice served for her daughter, and she had kept that promise. Outside the courthouse, Elena spoke briefly to reporters. "My daughter was a wonderful mother who worked hard to give her son a better life. Carlos was a good man who just wanted basic human dignity in his home. Roberto Salazar took them both away over nothing. Over pride and anger and his inability to accept that he was wrong. Hope he spends every day of his life behind bars thinking about what he destroyed." Daniel went to live with Elena in Mexico City. She quit her job to care for him full-time, using money from victim compensation funds and donations from the community to cover his extensive therapy needs. Progress was slow and painful. Daniel still couldn't verbally communicate what happened that night, and doctors said he might never be able to. But gradually, with Elena's patient love and professional help, he began to heal in small ways. Elena created a ritual with Daniel that helped them both grieve. Every Sunday, they would visit a park near their home where birds gathered around a small pond. Mariana had loved birds, always pointing them out to Daniel during their walks together. Now Elena and Daniel would sit on a bench tossing breadcrumbs, watching the birds swoop and dive. "Look, Mio," Elena would say softly, "there's Mama watching over us." And sometimes, when a bird flew particularly close or lingered nearby, Daniel would smile. Just for a moment, just a flicker, but it was there. A connection to the mother he lost, carried on wings. The house in Region Joshalot, where Carlos died, was eventually sold. The new owners had the upstairs apartment completely renovated, erasing the last physical traces of that horrible night. Senora Beatriz, the elderly neighbor, placed flowers on her doorstep every November 4th. A small memorial that nobody asked her to maintain, but that she felt compelled to honor. Coastal Luxury Lines established a scholarship fund in Mariana's name for children of crew members with special needs, ensuring that other families wouldn't have to make the impossible choices Mariana had faced. The Caribbean dream continued its weekly routes between Miami and Cozumel, but crew members who had known Mariana said the ship felt different now, haunted by the absence of her bright presence. 1 year after the murders, Elena and Daniel returned to Cancún for a memorial service at Cenote Azul. Local authorities had placed a small plaque near the cenote in memory of Mariana Ruiz and Carlos Mendez. Gone, but never forgotten. Elena stood at the water's edge with Daniel, holding his hand tightly. The Senate's surface reflected the sky, peaceful and clear, giving no hint of the tragedy it had witnessed. She thought about that terrible night, about her daughter's final moments, about the fear and pain Mariana must have felt. But she also thought about the fierce love Mariana had for Daniel, how even in her last moments she had fought to protect him. "Your mama loved you more than anything," Elena whispered to Daniel. "She fought for you until the very end. Don't ever forget that." Daniel leaned against his grandmother, and together they stood in silence as the sun set over the Yucatan jungle, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. 2 lives had been stolen here, destroyed by one man's rage and cruelty. But the love that Mariana and Carlos had inspired in those who knew them would endure. Justice had been served, but justice could never bring them back. That was the hard truth Elena carried with her every day. All she could do now was honor her daughter's memory by giving Daniel the life Mariana had dreamed of for him, by making sure the world remembered what was taken. and by ensuring that Roberto Salazar's name would forever be associated with the senseless violence he had committed. As they walked back to their car, Daniel tugged on Elena's hand and pointed upward. A white heron circled overhead before flying off toward the sea. Elena smiled through her tears. Yes, Mio, I see her too.